I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to Freedom Over Fascism.
Say the one thing that you want everybody who listens to this podcast to do, what would that be?
I want them to have a brave conversation, not a conversation that is going to lead to a ruined Thanksgiving meal, but maybe that aunt or maybe that coworker who just needs that little extra nudge and just needs to know what's at stake.
Hi, friends. It's Friday, November 1st, and as I say in this conversation, we only have a couple days until the election is over. All of the cliches hold true. Run through the tape, all gas, no brakes, leave it on the field, don't stop believing, don't boo, vote. This bonus conversation with Katie Blair, the VP of Advocacy at PFLAG, a 501c3 organization to support LGBTQ plus folks and their families, came together quickly, but packs one of the biggest punches, because you don't expect it. As an aside to my Hoosier friends and listeners, Katie lives in Indianapolis. Katie talks about PFLAG leading with love instead of the doom and gloom we all fall prey to. So let's stop doom scrolling, let's ignore the polls, and let's get out there to do something. When I asked Katie what one thing people could do before the election, she didn't talk about canvassing or calling or texting, even though all those things are needed. She asked everyone to have a brave conversation with someone they know. Push a little bit past your comfort zone to educate and empathize with someone who needs a little nudge to go to the polls with love and not suspicion, with hope instead of despair, with power and not in fear. Now, this isn't the time to have a combative conversation that will ruin Thanksgiving, but the time to be brave and fierce in our conviction that love wins and that we can achieve mighty things if we work together. I'll continue to write about the election and its aftermath on the Substack, but this is likely the last podcast before the election. Don't worry, we'll be back afterward to help understand whatever situation arises. As always, I'm asking for your support. Please subscribe to Freedom Over Fascism at www.freedomoverfascism.us. If you appreciate this podcast and my writing and you have the means, please choose a paid subscription. Here's my fantastic conversation with Katie Blair. May you all find a way to have a brave conversation this weekend and vote with love and ferocity for all our futures. Katie Blair, welcome to Freedom Over Fascism.
Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk.
We are a couple days out from the election. It'll be even fewer by the time our listeners get to hear this. So that's the basis where we're starting this conversation. And you are with PFLAG, which is a C3. Can you tell us more about what the mission? I'm sure everyone has heard about PFLAG, but really what your mission is. And then, talk about the main initiative that you guys have got going right now.
Yeah. Well, PFLAG is an over 50-year organization with its roots in advocacy and activism. But we're here, we provide support to families of LGBTQ plus folks, as well as LGBTQ plus folks themselves. We educate and we also teach our folks how to advocate and give them tools to be advocates in their communities. Right now, we are all in on the Love Votes campaign. That's our campaign to get out the vote and to really mobilize our 350 plus chapters and our over 500,000 members and supporters to go to the polls and vote with love this election.
Well, I think it's so wonderful that this is how you labeled the campaign because love is so much more emotionally valuable than saying it's really important discussion of rights and we're going to get into what the stakes are. But love brings it to the emotional level of when in past elections, when our dear friend Anat Shenker Osorio helped with the love wins framing, it really gives it the emotional punch that it needs. So So tell us, what is Love Votes doing to help people understand the importance of voting and the importance of getting everyone they know to vote and and getting people actually to the polls?
I want to go back to what you were saying about our message. At PFLAG National, we lead with love. We're leading with love all the way to the polls. And our Love Votes kind of work was about unifying and energizing our base instead of leading with that doom and gloom that we hear so often, especially in the election space. And so with Love Votes, we've got a few pillars. So, first, we want to get out the vote. We want all of our chapter leaders, chapter members, and supporters to go to the polls and cast their ballots with love. We want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to, understand those basic things, where to vote, when to vote, all of. But also we wanted to educate our folks on what's at stake this election, which is literally the lives of LGBTQ plus folks and their loved ones, their rights to live their lives authentically and to thrive. But also, we wanted to give folks those educational tools on what's at stake. And then also really understanding that democracy is on the line here. But then on top of all of that, we wanted to give folks the tools they need to engage. Our chapter leaders, our supporters are so deeply embedded in their communities that we really wanted to tell them the power is theirs to mobilize their communities and mobilize their networks to get to the polls and really share with them why it's so critical this year.
So I imagine, given the fact that you're an advocacy organization, that you have members who are already galvanized, but how well do you think they're embedded in their communities? How much movement do you think that this campaign provides, or how much information does it help get more people to the polls? Does it help them learn how to talk to their friends and relatives and neighbors and hairstylists? How do you view your impact?
Yeah. Well, whenever I talk about our PFLAG folks being embedded in their communities, a lot of times our folks, they're so humble and they're just trying to be, good parents and good helpers in their children's lives that they don't realize how powerful they are and how much of a leader they really are in their communities. There's so many times that I'll be talking to someone and they'll say, "Oh, I'm just a mom." And then you get going and it's like, well, you're also a university president and a PhD and all of these things. So our people bring everything to the table. They're also, there's not one P flagger that's the same. Maybe someone has a different journey. We also have folks all across the political spectrum, all across the country, different ages, genders, socioeconomic status, those kinds of things. So, really kind of helping them to understand their voices are so important and where they land. And then going back to your question, which is how are we measuring our impact? We've seen an outpouring of support from our chapter members and supporters. They've been showing up on countless calls to learn how to mobilize their communities with various tools that we offer. They are showing up and utilizing those tools, promoting everything on social media, out in their community at different festivals and tabling events. You will always find a P flag parent that is ready to talk to you at those kinds of things. And just really, yeah, boots on the ground in their community.
I'm curious. Obviously, we have a vast spectrum of acceptance and inclusion of LGBTQ plus folks and their families to very strong exclusion and harmful laws and ideas. Do you find that your PFLAG chapters also are geographically disparate enough to reach into communities who might not seem to be the most welcoming of LGBTQ plus people? And then what do they find, given that they're they're leading with love?
Reframing that question is people that are in scary places, how do they lead with love? Well, the thing is, right now, unfortunately, all of our communities are at stake. maybe you're in a red state. I sit here in Indiana, very red. But even folks that are in more accepting blue spaces, we're seeing folks.
Massachusetts here.
Yeah. But we're seeing book bans being passed. We're seeing school boards being more and more radicalized. And so while those threats may look different in various states, they are all happening and unfortunately, they're really targeting our families. And this is the time kind of really to fight back and to be fierce.
Fierce. I love that word.
Yes, they are not backing down. It is so great to see the power of PFLAGers in action.
I feel like fierce needs to be part of your name. But anyway, so what kind of tools do you provide to help people out in the community?
So we've got all sorts of great things. We've got a hub where folks can check their registration, see what's on their ballot, find their voting place, see those various ID laws. Everything changes from state to state. So that's quite a hurdle for people. And with that, we also have provided, since our PFLAG folks are so embedded in their communities, they get asked to go out and speak to various groups, table at various places. So we've actually created training modules for all 50 states, plus the US Virgin Islands and DC, on getting out the vote and voting rights that our PFLAGers have hit the ground running with. Additionally, we've got tools so that folks can really promote on social media, asking people to take the pledge to be a PFLAG voter, to vote for the freedom to be ourselves, the freedom to thrive, and the freedom to learn. That's what our pledge means. As well as we have a relational organizing tool that helps folks connect peer to peer with their friends and coworkers and distant aunts and all the things, but to connect them and really encourage them to vote and to vote with love this year.
So, our listeners have heard obviously that freedom narrative before. We talk about it a lot here. And I I think it's so important to reclaim that frame. What can our listeners do if they're not already attached to PFLAG to help support the organization? They all support the goals because they wouldn't be listening if they didn't. But how can people who are looking for places to help do that right before the election?
Yeah, well, all of these tools and resources are publicly available on our PFLAG website. It's not just for our chapter members, not behind any paywall or anything. It's right there. So pflag.org/love votes. And so you can find all of the things I talked about there. They are available for anyone. Take it, run with it, and use these resources to get your folks out. With such little time till the election, it really is go time, move, move, move. If anyone needs any little bit of a nudge, we're here to help and give you the tools to do that. And then I really encourage folks, if they do want to become active in a PFLAG chapter, to really look at our website. You can see all the chapters all across the country. If you're in need of support, want to find community, we are there to provide that.
Is it pretty easy to say they're in a town region that doesn't you have 300 and something chapters, but if they're in a region that doesn't have one, is it pretty easy to create one?
We've got online community that is very active. So we really do meet people where they're at. Wherever they're welcome to join PFLAG.
That's great. So I wanna take this for just a couple minutes in the direction of what is at stake here, because as you said, people in blue states can sometimes get to feeling complacent. People in red states can sometimes get to feeling helpless. And this, as much as we said it every year for the last 30, is the most important presidential election in our lifetime. So, can you tell me and our listeners what are the stakes of this election, both at a national and down ballot? I know you're in Indiana. I've done a bunch of work in Indiana. And so I have a little sense of what's going on at the state level in terms of the state legislature. What are the stakes in places with, like, MAGA supermajorities and places where you would think that everything's A-okay. But so sometimes we can start thinking like we should always think it should be like that everywhere, but we don't always think about how it's not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. And sometime after this, maybe we can commiserate about our Indiana wounds, but it's also a lovely place to be. So, right now, what's at stake this year, we saw 500 plus pieces of attack legislation introduced across the country, anti LGBTQ bills that span from banning trans people from using the bathroom that they identify with, from banning certain lessons to be taught in schools, don't say gay bills, bans on medically necessary care for trans folks. We've seen really the gauntlet, all really targeted towards LGBTQ plus folks and the rights of their loved ones. And so with that, oh, and I just want to mention that 500 plus number is not including Texas, because Texas was not in session this year. And so if they had been, that number would probably be around 600. And so how I think about this is that these bills, this movement against us is all encompassing right now, but it hasn't always been. A lot of these bills are things that have been introduced over the past 4 years. While our communities have always been under fire, this kind of jolt in anti LGBTQ attacks is a recent phenomenon. And just as quickly as we've seen them come on, I feel like we can put them to rest. And I think this election, we have the opportunity to do that. And like I said, no matter where you are in this country right now, it seems that there are threats happening at that local level. So it is so critical to go look up and down your ballot, because the politics that play the biggest role in your life are the ones that are in your backyard and at your city and school board levels. And so that's in some ways the most critical fight.
And we've seen in Indiana that when citizens sometimes wage that fight, particularly around libraries, they can win, but they have to not think that it's unwinnable. That was a double
Absolutely.
negative,
No,
but
my my toxic trait is that I always have hope. If I didn't have hope, then I wouldn't be able to do this job, and I wouldn't be able to be fired up for every single fight that we have. And that's something that I carry with me, and I try to lead with that. That leading with love is also leading with hope and optimism.
right. And I flip that around, which is I do this so I can have more hope because the
Yes.
doing of it produces more hope. Because when you're active, you don't get into quite as bad a doom cycle as if you're just sitting and watching MSNBC. Your members, do they run the gamut in terms of age or generation? And do you see a generational shift in the way that communities embrace LGBTQ plus folks?
So I would say our chapters are very diverse, and age is a big range. We've got people who, gosh, just weeks ago, I met with a family whose kid came out in the late 80s, and here they are providing support for folks whose kids just came out as, you know, trans and last week, and they're sharing those lessons that they've learned with them. And so it's really powerful to see that intergenerational work that's happening at our chapter levels. It was one of the most exciting things to see.
Do you see a generation gap? I know around marriage equality almost a decade ago, and where I live, it's more than 20 years ago, there was a huge generation gap in terms of who supported marriage equality and who didn't. Do you see a generation gap in terms of the embrace of the larger community of LGBTQ plus folks? Yeah. So is there a difference?
I think that folks are becoming more and more aware, as we LGBTQ plus folks are coming forward and telling our stories. It's hard to deny that there are trans folks that are living in your community that are awesome leaders. And then that there are, you know, gay folks next door. Like we're here and we're more comfortable being out. We got to keep these laws in check so that we're able to. But anymore, we've really been telling our stories. As far as the greater LGBTQ plus movement, it has taken a while for us to embrace all of the letters in our acronym to make sure that trans and queer folks are at the table whenever laws are being passed and that we're fighting for them just as hard as folks fought for marriage equality. And that's something that's come a really long way, but is deeply embedded in the work that PFLAG does.
At this point, at this moment, we're 4 days out from the end of the election
Why are you going to keep saying that?
because people need to get off their tushes and take action. So, if you could say the one thing that you want everybody who listens to this podcast to do, what would that be?
I want them to have a brave conversation, not a conversation that is going to lead to a ruined Thanksgiving meal, but maybe that aunt or maybe that coworker who just needs that little extra nudge and just needs to know what's at stake. Of course, sharing what you're comfortable with, but really just having that just one brave conversation, it can change the game for someone. And so that's what I'm hoping. Have that brave conversation, get them to the polls.
Katie, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. I love talking about brave conversations and fierce people. And obviously, PFLAG is the epitome of both. So I really appreciate the fact that you're coming on. This whole advocacy for freedom is not a once every 4 years conversation. It needs to happen every day, every year, at every level. So I'm sure we'll be able to chat again sometime.
Exactly. Holler at me the next time you want to talk any kind of advocacy. I love it. That's what I'm here for.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. Please leave a rating or review wherever you listen. And if you can, please subscribe at www.freedomoverfascism.us.